good. So Steve is going to be doing our first presentation on using gestures in Angular 2 with Typescript. Thanks for coming. I work for PSC. This is our space. We're glad to have you here. We have pizza and drinks and wonderful speakers.
Thanks for having us.
Of course.
You're
Yep.
awesome. Thank you, PSC.
There you go.
I'm Schwarz. I am not a gestures, Angular 2, or TypeScript expert, but I learned enough to figure out what I needed to do, so I thought I would share with you guys what I figured out. Please interrupt with questions, comments. What I'm going to talk about is this app, which is basically an app about, oh darn, I need to switch tabs. What's the magic on anti-full screening?
There you go.
There we go. What I wanted to build, was kind of a virtual cropping tool for a particular mobile app I'm playing around with, where I don't actually want to crunch it and actually, do a real crop. So there may be many different variations of the cropping I want to do. I just want to represent them as numbers. So basically, like this much in the X, this much in the Y, and this much in the rotation. And I keep track of those numbers, and I can then store all my different crops. So I came up with this. I have a bunch of different variations. But the notion is I need to be able to drag it around. I want to be able to drag and do the rotate. Basic kind of cropping things. I have it disabled now, but you could also stretch and shrink the crop area as well. So classic stuff. So that's the problem space I'm working in. When it comes to how do you do this, gestures, in this case what I'm using is, this is just a vertical pan, just panning up and down, right? This is a XY pan, right? And then you could use a pinch in and out to grow the size of the box, right? So that's basically the kinds of gestures. And it turns out these are all full screen. Control, that was the piece I was missing. Okay. These are all built into Angular 2 now. So there's mappings for all these through the Hammer. Thank you for dropping out network. These are all built in Angular 2 using the Hammer.js library, which I guess is pretty much standard library for handling gestures. And it builds in all these features like rotate, pinch, press, panning, tapping, and swiping. So these all come built in. The only thing that Hammer and the Angular 2 integration don't give you is unifying mouse gestures. So if you want to do something like mouse down versus tap, say, you don't magically get the same events once you hook up the gestures. You actually have to still handle both sets of events if that meant something to you. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few things here. I'll give you kind of just the basic setup, and then we'll actually look at some code about how this all works, right? So the basic notion is you just, once you've got Angular 2 installed, you just install Hammer and Hammer Time. And what Hammer Time does is it's a really small polyfill that gives you like the touch action, I guess it's an HTML5 goodness, to make touches work better in older browsers. And then all you do is import the two modules right into your, typically you put it into your app module at the top end. It doesn't matter where they get imported, as long as they're imported. And then you can just go on and hook up the actual events. Right? So there's really three pieces to doing this. The first piece I want to start with are the actual collecting up the events. So in Angular 2, the way you do that is you take your thing you want to move around, and then you use the parens around the event you're interested in, and then you say, hey, when one of these events occur, call the onPanStart method of this component, and give me the raw event with it. And you typically want to pass along the raw event because you want to usually call prevent default on it. You may not want, especially in the case of panning, in Firefox, for example, if you just put your mouse down on an image and move, it'll actually grab the image and move it around on the screen, which is totally evil if you're trying to do some sort of panning thing, right? It's not very helpful. So one of the reasons you pass the event in would be to stop that. So here I'm hooking for panning is the example I'm going to work on here. There's two things I keep track of. The start of the pan, so that's the finger down and move, right? And then the actual during the movement. Because in my case of my little cropping app here, you want to be able to see the thing you're moving move as you're moving it. If you just want to move it somewhere and drop it, you could conceivably just hook the start and the end events, and then you would just go bink, bink, you know, just
like wherever you ended, that's where it would jump to.
That's where it would jump to. Where in this kind of thing, I kind of want the interactivity of the move. So here's all the different events. You can get the generic pan event, for example. This pattern they have here applies to all those different events. So pinch, swipe, and so on. They all will give you the generic event, which is basically like listening for all the individual pieces, and then the specific ones. So the model I use in this scenario, like as I said, was to capture the initial value on the, whatever it is start, and then keep following the moves as they occur so I can update my view. So here's basically what all the code looks like, right? And this pattern I found was, this pattern bothered me, but it was the only way I knew to do it. So the notion is, you're gonna, on the start, you pretty much say, don't do anything else, and then keep track of the events, the current position you're at, and then as you get new events in, you're gonna update the current location with where you started and any change in there. So you're just gonna keep moving it. My initial thinking was, oh, I should just be able to take the delta and just update X. And that ends up just geometrically increasing where you go. Your little drag just shoots you off the screen in just a few movement events. Because it's the delta from the start each time. It's not the delta from the last move. So you need to actually keep track of the start. And you don't really know where you're starting. This might be a little complicated. You know where your object is on the screen. Say it's at 1010. But where you put your mouse down or your finger down might be at 250, 250. You don't really want that X location to be the location, XY location to be the location of your object. You just want to keep track of where you moved from. To and from, exactly. Beautifully put. So that's why I keep track of where did I start in the X and the Y, and then I update them all through the events. It's really very, very simple. And
back to the start, you're kind of tracking that possibility for an undo.
no, it's not actually because of an undo. And the start is really just so that when I finally, since I only track the start and the movement, so when I'm finally done, I'm ignoring the end.
Okay.
But I want at any one moment that I get an update on the panning, that it's going to move there, and then I'll just stop paying attention and it'll stick there.
Okay.
So this is just to give me the delta from the beginning of the pan at the very end of it all. So once we've got the events wired up, and we're actually updating our actual object component with the new locations, then we actually need to move the thing around, right? So we update in the template. I just move this guy by just using the margin left and margin top. It's the dumbest possible way, right? You could also put it in, throw it into absolute position and use, left and top or whatever you're happy doing. This was the easiest way to do it. And then I use interpolation here just so that you can see where you're at.
I'm coming at this from an app standpoint. So you're making this for a mobile device.
Right.
So, for instance, your essential outcome is to be able to manipulate an image.
Right. And in this case, what I'm moving is just like the box over the top of the image.
Okay.
So this is what I would put in what I would call the mask, for example, the mask
Okay.
I'm laying over the top. And you wouldn't necessarily put the XY on it, but for my little demo
So
component.
as far as being responsive, are you addressing that?
As far as like responsive and the resizing aspect of it, this guy doesn't really care because he's just a little cropper, right?
Okay.
So he may be overall be responsive,
Okay.
but within that canvas, shall we say, or within the div it's in,
Okay.
excuse me, he doesn't care if that grows or shrinks. Right? It's just XY relative to its origin. So let's see this in action. Oh, sorry, I did before we go to that. So here's everything that I've talked about. Right? So let's say we can ignore the styles up here, we don't care. So I just threw it all in one simple component called demo1. Here's our template. Here I'm updating the current location by binding to the X and the Y of our actual component, which are going to be updated by the drag. And then I interpolate and show the values. And this is all the whole class needs, the masking class really needs. It's it has members of current location, a happy little title, and then just tracks these two gesture events that come through to update itself. So, that's what it's doing. Right? So you can just drag it as it drags. It's getting the events, updating its member data, and then Angular just re-renders it with the latest, wherever it happens to be in the digest cycle. I have a network connection. So that's really how they all work. So you could do the same thing with swiping, with pinch and resize. You basically have the same model, where I'm starting at the gesture, keep track of some stuff, do a little bookkeeping, and then I'm doing the thing, update your model, and then update your template, and then you're done. So you could do that in every component, but that's not nice. We want to reuse. We don't want to rewrite that stupid little bookkeeping over and over. So I said, well, apparently the way you do stuff in Angular 2 is you write directives, right? You want to reuse this little draggy code. So I'll just write a directive for it called drag move directive. And I'm using I'll make this a little bigger here. I'm using a selector which basically says, if you drop the attribute drag move on any div, this directive will be applied. And then it'll automatically hook the pan start and pan end events on that object. So basically host listener is basically saying, whatever dude drag move is on in a template somewhere, wire yourself in if you match. If he's got this attribute on him, apply this to it.
And pan start and pan move are from Hammer.
They're actually from Angular 2.
Okay.
And if you have Hammer installed, they're wired up.
I see.
So they're always there, but if you forget to import Hammer, you'll get no events. At least that's my understanding.
Okay.
How it works, yeah. So I basically moved all that bookkeeping in here where I'm saying, hey, I take an input of my current X and Y, and I'm going to output an event which tells you where to move to. Right? So this guy keeps track of all the start and end for any object you hand it off to. And we can see that in action here. So now our component gets a lot simpler. If we look at the component, I add the drag move attribute onto it. I hand in my original X and Y location of where we're starting out at, and then I'm listening for the location change that's coming back from the directive. So these are the inputs to that directive. This basically activates it. Here are its inputs, and here's the output from that directive. The directive is going to say, hey, call the onPan event with that event. And that event is got the X and the Y on it. So basically, that whole directive is just bundling up the current X and Y you want to move to, and handing it into this guy as an event in the onPan. And so if you want to pan something, just drop that directive in, and all you implement is one method to handle listening on it. And so you can do the same thing for all the other ones. Rotate, shrink and stretch, pinch, and that's pretty much how it works. Let me see if I had anything else on that. So guess what? You refactor it, and it works exactly the same. Surprise, surprise, right? Not a big surprise. You're underwhelmed?
No, overwhelmed.
Okay. So that's really all there is to it. There's not a lot of magic to this. I have a few tips I ran across that might help other people who are faced with this stuff if they're learning it like I did. Right in, I'll use the virtual finger here. Right in Hammer, they give you a little emulator, that script that you can load up. So if you're working on a laptop and you want to get the real events for like pinch, because you don't get them otherwise through a browser. You just fire up, you import this, you add the script and fire up the emulator. You can also on Chrome DevTools, you can turn on gestures, so you'll get tap events instead of getting mouse down or mouse up. So that's nice too. You can get kind of goofed up on zooming if you don't set your view. If you disable user scalable, it may the browser will do the work instead of passing the event through to your app. And there's a few others like that. So you may want to have to set the initial scale and then say it's not scalable. Otherwise the phone, for example, would take over and never pass the events to your actual
Kind of like what Firefox does, or is that a different issue? At least at Firefox.
Yes,
it'll do weird stuff with images.
It's helping you, right?
Okay.
Pan, you probably didn't notice it in the scroll thing. Vertical pan tends to be slow because the browser thinks you're scrolling. So I'm probably going to end up changing my interface to put my little wheel of degrees at the bottom, so it's a horizontal pan instead. I'm looking around for other solutions for that. And similarly, when I talked about the Firefox craziness, I just wrote another directive, which is mouse down prevent default directive. And basically, you just add prevent default to anything, and it basically calls prevent default on it. So I don't have to write the prevent default everywhere. I can just drop this attribute on anything. I don't want to have that image drag madness occur. Okay, and let's see if I have another tip here. Cool. No, that was it. So in this presentation are the actual those two little demo components, so you can actually see the source. They're built into the slideshow itself. My virtual cropping thing is definitely a work in progress. Feel free to take a look at it. I found these two articles, the Scotch.io one was really good for getting started, and then the HTML5 Rocks, which is a great site anyway, has a good just general overview on how the touch stuff works. So I thought that was a helpful one. So that was it. Thanks, guys.
I was just curious, I don't think I saw it in the code, but obviously you have like a boundary for that thing, like where you could not drag it outside of. Is that, do you set that up using Hammer, or?
You don't have to set it up at all. It's actually constrained by its parent, right? I guess you could give it values that would push it outside of your div, but
by default it's whatever its parent is.
Yeah, because you're not going to generate events outside of it. It's only listening in the div that you say listen for events in this div. So you're not just throwing the listener on the window. You throw it on the actual.
So then, if you have a square inside a bigger square and you drag it to the left, does it just stop working as soon as the mouse? Okay, so it actually hangs on to it anyways until you mouse up or.
Yeah, so I'm actually off the div.
Right.
But since I started, it's
Yep.
not. It's not
still tracking
enabled here.
the pan.
Right, but the pan event, since I put the pan event on this red outline, so anywhere in there I can start the event. Excuse me, but I could also, once I've hooked it, it still is generating events when I'm out here. But you're just basically ignoring. But yeah, I could.
So you would have to do something if you needed it to not go beyond.
I could look at the numbers and pin them. Right,
Gotcha.
Exactly right. I could pin them to that location and say, oh, but you can't go off the screen. That's a good point. There'll probably be a good bug report I'll get back as soon as I release it.
Just wondering what happens when you refresh the page.
Oh, it doesn't, there's no history, right? It's just I'm just storing all in memory right now, just for this demo. In real life, you'd want to store them somewhere if you care, which would be the ultimate goal, of course, that we'd be caring. Cool. Any other questions? Cool. Thanks, guys.